Hey guys, this is part two of the previous show. I believe we left off talking about the phi ratio, sacred geometry, and how how the phi ratio, golden mean, was used in sacred structures to embed magnetism and kind of it's the answer to perfect embedding and perfect compression. So that's kind of where we're going to pick up and leave off again. So basically, it turns out that DNA uses that shape exactly to a T, um, for multiple reasons. We're about to go over that. Basically, at different angles, you have the golden mean, or the Fibonacci sequence, the phi ratio, but it's at different angles depending on how you tilt it. You have the golden mean, you have the phi ratio, you have the phi ratio squared or the phi ratio cubed, and it's all throughout a DNA depending on which way you look at it, or tilt it, or I guess analyze it. Basically, you have it cubed, squared, or just flat out phi. And when you're considering the zipper effect, where the double helix meets up, I believe they call it a nonlinear hydrogen bond. That's what we believe is responsible for aging, the stability of that bond right there. And it actually uses the phi ratio rectangularly, if you will. A good example would be to look at quartz under a microscope. Same structure, same spiraled effect, same helix effect. So it solves the problem of how you embed short length waves into long length waves. Easy way to think about it is kind of a spring or a coil. If you were to stretch that spring out, it gets longer this way, but it gets skinnier this way as you tighten it out. So you have the short wave and the long wave. The longer that long wave gets, the shorter the short wave gets this way. So basically, it's kind of like I said, computer programming or anything else. You're embedding another frequency into a longer frequency, and that's how the DNA works. The long wave, we usually call it sound. When you're dealing with piezoelectricity, it's called stricture, I believe. And then your short wave would be considered voltage, basically. So, long story short, the long wave and the short waves are in your DNA are connected to the sound waves of your heart. The length of it has to do with what, I guess, codon packings you would be reading because of the short waves, basically. So if you think of it as your emotion, your heartbeat, everything like that has to do with what packets of information are being read in your DNA. That's why it's not important. It's important not to mess with the spacing of the codons, or the letters, as you would say. Before we go on, I wanted to share a reference with you that a lot of the people that work in this theory, well, no longer a theory, but work on this subject and talk about this subject, use for a good reference. There's a 1982 book called The Grammatical Man: Information, Entropy, Language, and Life. It's written by Jeremy Campbell, and it's really mind-blowing when you really consider what it has to say. In this, he discusses how DNA basically causes what's called high signal to noise ratio, something like that, high signal to sound ratio. And it's talking about how the RNA and the DNA make pairs, like a transistor making an effective pass of information, but it does it millions of times a day. It talks in depth about how it does this and why it does this. So basically, it talks about how the DNA takes the RNA It makes this coupling, this pairing of information, replicating of information millions of times a day, and how it's not really random at all. It gets really in depth about it. It's kind of like fitting two puzzle pieces together. It's the zipper effect, if you will, down the double helix. And since it does it with such a high accuracy, millions of times a day, they had to name it, so they called it high signal to noise ratio. And that's a little bit more in depth for people that want to look things up and go a step further with their own research. His question was how can it do it millions of times a day and be so accurate? And he found out it was a language problem, if you will. As I said, context richness is how you would put it. So if you had a book and the book was there, I don't know how else to explain this, but the book's there, everything's going fine, you're reading along, and a couple of the letters are missing, basically. And you'd still be able to read the book, right? Say, just the letter E is missing or whatever it is. There'd be so much of a context for you to, from other words, other places, other chapters, other paragraphs, other sentences, there'd be so much context richness that you wouldn't need those. That you could take the coding language, and which would just be the alphabet, and fill in the blanks, right? That's what DNA does. So the example he gave is why DNA can do this is put yourself a computer programmer trying to debug DNA, and you just want to take one line item, just one order of that, saying meaning one button, one click, one program that runs just one aspect of it. And you're to pluck that out and then get into the coding of it. There'd be so much information involved with it that if you tried to actually debug it, the software, that you would just lose your mind. You'd go crazy. So if you wanted to debug it, you'd have to look at the long story, the context aspect of it, where you would look into the long pieces of code and see and look at it that way, instead of trying to actually go in and debug the actual software that it's trying to read, right? So it's like the same problem as with biologists today. They think they understand that one wavelength, where I was talking about the blue light, the blue fire, that one UV double helix strand. They think they understand that because they understand the letters. They think, okay, there's this code sits next to that code, and yada 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 goes down the line. But they're only understanding the letter aspect. They don't understand the words, the sentence, the paragraph, and as Dan Winter would put, they don't even know that there's such thing as a chapter or a book, and they're still chopping things apart. And it's changing the point of coherence or conjugation, where the wavelengths all meet up and harmonize, which can change which packets of information your body's reading. The easiest way to put it is to see what genes are active, or the active sites in your DNA, is to look at the I guess you could say euphemism that Dan Winter used a lot. He was always talking about taking just a piece of string, braiding it like your DNA. And when you braid it, you'd have, a thicker piece of string or yarn, and then you braid that again, and you'd have a rope, and then you could even braid the rope within itself. So that's how embedding works. That's how the phi ratio works. It's how all this condensing works, basically. So you can get a lot of information into one object, right? So if you're that little piece of string inside the rope, you're tucked away in there. You have like no mechanical interaction with the RNA, right? So they can't even see if they match up or make a pair. So the way that it's braided has to do with what packets of information are being decoded, basically, right? So basically, the heart and your emotions and things like that choose which parts of the DNA replicate with the RNA. It's something that's like boggled DNA and biologists, people that study this for a long time, but they started to understand that the heart is kind of like the programmer. It's almost like AIDS when you think about AIDS. You have this virus in your cells. It's lying there dormant. And, oh, excuse me for yawning so much. It's lying there dormant, and you can see that it's there, but it's not affecting you. But if you catch a cold, or your immune system gets weakened, then this virus switches on. And they've also found out like mind state, mood state has a lot to do if you get sick or get sick often. If you're in a depressed, low frequency state, then it's easier to actually get sick, get a flu, get the cold, anything like that. It's actually weakens your immune system. So something to think about. To make it easier to understand, we know the letters and how they sit next to each other, but there's which group of those letters gets turned on and activated. And we don't understand that because, say the programmer in the computer program would know that you skip 2 lines, go up 6 lines, go up, read up 4 lines, yada, yada, yada. Because it's the programmer, it knows what it's trying to do. It knows, it has a method to the madness, if you will. But these geneticists only know that the letters are beside each other. They didn't have any idea what was causing certain genes to become active. So the whole point of this is the long wave, the sound wave, your emotion, what you get from your heart, from your EKG, actually decides which way your DNA is braided. Okay? And through that, your DNA can match with RNA differently and then replicate different base pairs, different codes. So your emotion, this long wave, the signal you get from your heart actually affects your DNA and what replicates inside your body. So kind of the moral to the story is we're never going to know which programs, which genes, what gets switched on and off by looking at which letters are next to each other. We got to look at the long wave, all right, not the short waves where they're beside each other. The long wave, the big picture, okay? Once we can break down that long wave and understand things a little bit more with the frequency and the emotion of the heart and look at things a little, you could look at it scientifically, but you'd have to study it during moments of emotion, things like that, to see which genes are replicating. Once we understand that, then we can actually understand the language enough to genetically manipulate something without harming it, okay? Which, still, in my opinion, I wouldn't want to tamper with it. So basically, like I said, it's the sound waves, or phonon, which is just a fancy way to say sound in water. How they braid your DNA, and then through the structure of that DNA can choose which genes are replicated, okay? Trying to make this as basic as possible so people can actually understand what I'm trying to convey. Not to say that anybody's stupid, just to say that I might not be the best speaker in trying to convey my thoughts, that's all. So a few years ago, scientists did an experiment looking at the separation and the bonding of DNA. And there's certain chemicals present during the separation of that split, I guess you could say. A lot of people call it the zipper in the DNA. And it decides how much bonding within like the nonlinear hydrogen bonds in between the zipper of the double helix actually makes, how much of a bond it actually makes. So that bond has to do with a very particular enzyme, basically. And what the scientist did was measure for the presence of this enzyme. And he did it during the DNA replication, the splitting of the zipper, if you will, for each half of the codon. And they found out that the heart harmonics, the amount of sound and the frequency of the sound coming from the heart actually decides the amount of braiding, or how tight the braid or the bond is made during replication. So they found out without a doubt that your heart, your emotions, actually has to do with the braiding of your DNA and which codons replicate, and how strong of a bond is between the two codons, two halves of the codons, and much, much more. So basically, your heart is the programmer. So it directly, measurably has an effect on, based on the harmonics of the heart, on which information is read and replicated, okay? And how tight that braid of information is. And then when they take biofeedback data and they realize and they measure your heart during moments of intense emotion, they realize there's a cascading effect that is as close as we can measure to the golden mean, or the golden ratio, phi ratio, as we can get, okay? As close as we can measure. And it's all throughout your body. It's everywhere. It's all around you. It's in nature everywhere. Everything has this ratio. Plants, animals, paintings, Trump's hair, roses, faces, everything. A lot of it's in sacred structures, wavelengths, how a wave crashes. Everything. You can sit here and go through and find the golden mean, the golden ratio, in everything, okay? So it's a lot to take in, but I mean, when you really consider everything, the measurements, then you realize that even our high-tech biofeedback stuff, when measuring emotions during moments, or measuring your heartbeat during moments of intense emotion, you get the golden mean. So it's, again, more proof that your spiritual state, your emotional state, has a lot to do with your physical state. Okay, not just in the sense like, oh, I'll go do some push-ups or I'll go for a jog, but in the sense that on the smallest microbial level, it is there. Okay, it is affecting how everything is taken care of, how everything is seen, done, and what packets of information are replicating inside of your body. And if it's orderly, it's normal. But if it's disorderly, it causes cancer. It is cancerous. I think I'm gonna call this part 2 for the moment, and I'm gonna pull up some more good images so I can transfer you guys into the third and final part of this, and try not to keep the show too long. That way, nobody gets bored or lost with it. But I'm gonna go ahead and start working on part 3, and I'm gonna get you guys some really good images. Maybe I can get some videos up, and we'll go further. But we're gonna leave off on the biofeedback part right there, where we're starting to see the golden ratio, the golden mean, the phi ratio within our heartbeats. So hope you guys are enjoying this, and yeah, just have a good day.